England, 1818. The chandeliers of Lord Whitmore's London townhouse cast a warm golden glow over the assembled company below. Winter had settled over the capital with its characteristic damp chill. But inside the residence on Berkeley Square, the air was thick with the heat of bodies pressed together, the mingled scents of beeswax candles, French perfume, and roasted meats from the kitchens. Eleanor Pemberton stood in the shadowed alcove near the servants' entrance to the dining room, her green-gray eyes scanning the proceedings with quiet vigilance. At 27, she had long since learned the art of invisibility, of moving through the periphery of grand occasions without drawing attention to herself. Her chestnut hair, threaded now with the faintest hints of copper that caught the candlelight, was pulled back in a simple knot at the base of her neck. The dark blue wool of her gown was serviceable rather than fashionable, marking her clearly as what she was, a woman in service. She had served 5 years not merely as a servant, but as Lady Whitmore's companion, and, whenever required, the quiet hand that kept the household's machinery from stalling. "Miss Pemberton," came the sharp whisper of Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper. "His lordship wishes the claret brought up now. And mind you tell those girls to keep their eyes down when they serve. We've the Duke of Northmere at table tonight." Eleanor nodded, her hands clasped before her in an attitude of respectful attention. "Of course, Mrs. Davies. I shall see to it personally. The Duke of Northmere." Eleanor had heard the name spoken with a mixture of reverence and speculation throughout the household for days. William Huntington, they said, was a man of 34 years, never married despite the collective efforts of every matchmaking mama in London. His estates were vast, his fortune considerable, his manner notoriously reserved. She made her way down to the kitchens, where chaos reigned in the particular way it always did when Lord Whitmore entertained. Cook was barking orders at the scullery maids. Footmen rushed past with silver salvers, and in the midst of it all, young Jenny stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror as she stared at the tray she carried. "Miss Pemberton," the girl whispered urgently as Eleanor approached. "I can't do it. I can't go up there with all them fine lords and ladies watching. What if I drop something?" Eleanor's expression softened. Jenny was barely 16, newly arrived from the country, and utterly unprepared for the demands of a London household. "Take a breath," Eleanor said quietly, her voice carrying none of the sharpness that usually characterized interactions between upper and lower servants. "You need only focus on one step, then another. Keep your gaze on the floor just ahead of you, and remember that they are simply people. People who could have me dismissed for one wrong move." Jenny countered, her hands trembling. Eleanor reached out and steadied the tray. "Then we shall go together. Follow my lead." They ascended the servants' stairs, the sounds of conversation and laughter growing louder as they approached the dining room. Eleanor pushed open the door with her shoulder, holding it for Jenny to pass through, and together they entered the brilliantly lit chamber. The long table was crowded with guests, perhaps 20 in all, their jewels glittering and their voices raised in animated discourse. Lord Whitmore sat at the head, his weathered face flushed with wine and satisfaction. Beside him, Lady Whitmore held court with her usual cold grace, her sharp eyes missing nothing. Eleanor had served in this household for 5 years. Ever since her father's death had left the family penniless, she had learned to navigate these waters with care, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to make herself useful without making herself noticed. They were halfway around the table when it happened. Jenny, her attention fixed on the tray she carried, failed to notice the footman stepping backward from his position near the wall. The collision was inevitable. The tray lurched, and a crystal decanter of deep red claret tilted dangerously. Time seemed to slow. Eleanor saw Lady Whitmore's eyes widen in horror, saw Jenny's face go white with terror, saw the arc of crimson liquid as it began to fall toward the pristine white linen of the tablecloth and the expensive gown of Mrs. Harrington, who sat nearest to the disaster. Without thinking, Eleanor moved. Her hands shot out, catching the decanter before it could complete its fall, steadying the tray with her other hand, and in one fluid motion, she redirected the spilled wine away from Mrs. Harrington and onto the empty space of tablecloth between place settings. The crimson stain spread across the linen, but no guest was touched, no gown was ruined. "Forgive us, madam," Eleanor said quietly to Mrs. Harrington, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "A momentary clumsiness. It shall be attended to at once." She gestured sharply to the footman, who immediately came forward with fresh linen, and to Jenny, who stood frozen in mortification. "Return to the kitchens," Eleanor murmured. "Send Thomas up with the wine." It was then, as she turned to supervise the swift removal of the stained cloth and its replacement, that she felt the weight of someone's gaze upon her. She glanced up just for a moment, and found herself looking directly into the eyes of a man seated halfway down the table. The Duke of Northmere was watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. His eyes were a deep, striking blue, like the ocean at twilight, and they held an intelligence that seemed to see far more than the simple tableau of a servant managing a minor disaster. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as though he had run his hands through it, and the sharp planes of his face held a severity that might have been intimidating had it not been softened by the faint curiosity in his expression. For a moment, brief but unmistakable, the noise of the dining room seemed to fade. Then Eleanor lowered her eyes, curtsied to no one in particular, and withdrew as swiftly as propriety allowed. In the kitchens, she found Jenny collapsed on a stool, her face buried in her hands. "I'm to be dismissed," the girl sobbed. "Oh, Miss Pemberton, I'm so sorry. I've ruined everything." "You have ruined nothing," Eleanor replied firmly. A decanter was steadied, a cloth was changed, and the evening proceeds. "Now dry your eyes and return to your duties. There is still much to be done tonight." The remainder of the evening passed without incident. Eleanor supervised the clearing of courses, the serving of desserts, the presentation of port and cigars for the gentlemen, while the ladies withdrew. She was accustomed to the rhythm of such occasions, the choreography of service that must appear effortless while requiring constant attention. It was well past midnight when the last guest departed, and the household began the work of restoring order. Eleanor made her final rounds, ensuring that all fires were banked, all doors secured, all remaining tasks delegated to the night staff. Only then did she retreat to her small room on the third floor, a chamber barely large enough for a narrow bed and a single chest of drawers. She sat at the tiny desk beneath the window and drew out her writing case. By the light of a single candle, she composed her weekly letter to her mother. "Dearest Mamma," she wrote, her handwriting careful and even. "I trust this letter finds you well, and that the weather in Derbyshire has not been too harsh. I am enclosing what I am able this month. Please ensure you use it for the medicine Dr. Carlyle recommended, and do not concern yourself with economies at the expense of your health." Eleanor paused, her pen hovering over the paper. What could she tell her mother of her life here? That she spent her days ensuring the comfort of a family that barely acknowledged her existence, that the education her father had insisted upon, the accomplishments that had once marked her as a gentleman's daughter, now served only to make her more effective at anticipating the needs of her employers. Lord Whitmore's household remained steady, she continued, choosing her words with care. "I am well, and have no complaints. Please write soon, and tell me how you fare. Your loving daughter, Eleanor." She sealed the letter along with the carefully hoarded coins from her monthly wages, and set it aside for posting in the morning. £52 per annum did not stretch far, when one had a mother to support, medicine to purchase, and one's own modest needs to meet. But Eleanor had become adept at stretching every shilling, at making do with worn gloves and mended stockings, at finding small ways to set aside something for the future, however uncertain that future might be. Sleep was elusive that night. Eleanor lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the house settling around her, and found herself thinking of blue eyes that had watched her with unexpected curiosity, of a moment when she had felt seen, rather than merely observed. Foolishness, she told herself sternly. The Duke of Northmere had probably forgotten her existence the moment she left the dining room. Men of his station did not take note of servants, particularly not aging spinsters, whose only distinction was a talent for managing minor crises. The morning dawned gray and damp, a typical London winter day. Eleanor rose early, as she always did, and went about her duties with her usual efficiency. Lady Whitmore required her correspondence organized, her morning chocolate prepared just so, her calls planned with strategic precision. There were menus to approve, supplies to order, and the eternal task of managing the household staff with a firm but fair hand. She was in the library, gathering the books Lady Whitmore had finished reading and preparing a list of volumes to request from the lending library, when the butler entered with unusual haste. "Miss Pemberton," he said, his usually impassive face showing a flicker of confusion. "His Grace, the Duke of Northmere, has called. He wishes to speak with Lord Whitmore on a matter of business." Eleanor looked up from her task. "Then you should show him to his lordship's study, Mr. Bennet." His lordship is not at home, Bennet replied. He has gone to his club and will not return until this afternoon. I informed his grace of this, but he has requested to wait in the library, if it would not be an inconvenience. The library, where Eleanor currently stood, surrounded by stacks of books and papers. I shall remove myself at once, she said quickly. Please show his grace in. But even as she moved to gather her materials, the door opened, and William Huntington, Duke of Northmere, entered the room. He was taller than she had realized, his broad shoulders filling the doorway, and in the clearer light of morning, she could see the character written in his face, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested a man who spent time outdoors, the firm set of his mouth that spoke of decision and will. Forgive the intrusion, he said, his voice a rich baritone that carried easily across the room. I was told I might wait here. Eleanor curtsied, her eyes lowered. Of course, your grace. I was just finishing a task for Lady Whitmore. I shall not disturb you. You are not disturbing me, he replied, and there was something in his tone that made her look up despite herself. He was studying her again, with that same penetrating gaze she remembered from the previous evening. You are the woman who caught the decanter last night, he said. It was not a question. I am, your grace. I hope the incident did not spoil your enjoyment of the evening. On the contrary, he said slowly, moving further into the room. It was the most interesting moment of the entire affair. Tell me, do you read? The question was so unexpected that Eleanor nearly dropped the book she held. Your grace? He gestured to the volumes surrounding them. You are in a library. I assume you have some purpose here beyond simple organization. Eleanor felt heat rising in her cheeks. It was improper for a servant to make free with an employer's library, though Lady Whitmore had never explicitly forbidden it. I organize Lady Whitmore's reading, she said carefully. And yes, when my duties permit, I sometimes read. What do you read? His curiosity seemed genuine, almost academic. Eleanor hesitated, torn between propriety and honesty. Finally, she indicated the book in her hands. At present, Mr. Wordsworth's poems. Lady Whitmore found them tedious, but I confess I find them compelling. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, a subtle softening that transformed his severe features into something almost approachable. Do you, indeed? And which do you find most compelling? Tintern Abbey, Eleanor replied before she could stop herself. The way he captures the relationship between memory and present experience. The notion that nature provides solace even in absence. I find it remarkably perceptive. William Huntington moved closer, and Eleanor became acutely aware of his presence, of the faint scent of sandalwood and something else, something distinctly male that made her pulse quicken in a way that was entirely inappropriate. You have an educated manner of speaking, he observed. That is unusual in a woman in service. Eleanor's spine straightened. My father was Viscount Pemberton, she said quietly. He believed in education for all his children, regardless of gender. That belief, along with his fortune, is all that remains of his legacy. The moment the words left her mouth, Eleanor regretted them. It was one thing to maintain one's dignity in service, quite another to speak so freely to a duke, to reveal the bitterness that sometimes threatened to overwhelm her careful composure. But William Huntington did not look shocked or offended. Instead, his expression became thoughtful. Pemberton, he repeated. I knew that name once. Your father suffered reversals, I believe. A genteel term for complete ruination, Eleanor said, then caught herself. Forgive me, your grace. I should not speak so frankly. Why not? He asked simply. Truth is preferable to evasion, is it not? Before Eleanor could formulate a response, they heard footsteps in the hall, and she quickly set down the books she held. I should go, she said. Your business with Lord Whitmore is no concern of mine. Perhaps not, the Duke replied. But I wonder if we might speak again, Miss Pemberton. Eleanor met his gaze one final time, seeing in those blue eyes something she could not quite name. Curiosity, yes, but also a kind of recognition, as though he had found something unexpected and was not entirely certain what to do with the discovery. I am certain your grace has far more pressing concerns than conversation with a servant, she said. And this time her curtsy was deeper, more final. Good day, your grace. She left the library quickly, her heart beating far too rapidly, her mind in turmoil. Whatever had just passed between them, it was dangerous. Eleanor had learned the hard way that hope was a luxury she could not afford, that the distance between her current position and her former status was a chasm that could not be bridged by pleasant conversation and shared literary interests. Yet as she returned to her duties, supervising the polishing of silver and the airing of linens, she found her thoughts returning again and again to blue eyes and unexpected questions, to the way William Huntington had looked at her as though she were a person, rather than merely a function. That evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she found herself pausing at her small window, looking out over the darkened streets of London. Somewhere in this vast city, the Duke of Northmere was likely attending some glittering social event, surrounded by women of beauty and consequence. Women who could meet him as equals rather than looking up from a position of servitude. The thought should have brought resignation. Instead, it brought a peculiar ache she had not felt in years. A reminder that beneath the calm competence she had cultivated, beneath the acceptance of her reduced circumstances, there remained a woman who remembered what it was to be seen, to be valued, to hope for something more than mere survival. Foolish, Eleanor whispered to her reflection in the dark glass. Utterly foolish. But she did not stop herself from wondering if William Huntington had truly meant what he said, if he genuinely wished to speak with her again, if perhaps, just perhaps, the universe still held room for unexpected possibilities. In his elegant townhouse across London, William Huntington sat in his study, a glass of brandy untouched before him, and contemplated the curious discovery he had made that day. Miss Eleanor Pemberton, daughter of a ruined viscount, now serving as a companion in a household that barely acknowledged her existence, yet speaking of Wordsworth with the insight of a scholar, and managing crises with the grace of a duchess. He had come to the Whitmore residence with genuine business to discuss, but he could not deny that curiosity had played a role in his timing. The woman from the previous evening had intrigued him in a way he could not fully explain, and the conversation in the library had only deepened that intrigue. William signaled to his secretary, who waited discreetly near the door. "Dalton, I need you to make some inquiries for me, discreetly." "Of course, Your Grace. What do you wish to know?" "Everything you can discover about the late Viscount Pemberton and his family, particularly what led to his financial ruin and what became of his survivors." As Dalton withdrew to begin his investigations, William returned his attention to the window, his mind occupied with questions he had not anticipated asking. What circumstances had reduced a viscount's daughter to service? What strength of character had allowed her to maintain such dignity in the face of such a fall? And why did he find himself caring about the answers with an intensity that surprised him? London's winter night pressed against the glass, cold and impersonal. But William Huntington felt the stirring of something he had not experienced in years. Genuine interest in another person. A desire to know more, to understand the story behind. Those intelligent green-gray eyes, and that careful composure. Tomorrow, he decided, he would return to Berkeley Square. Lord Whitmore's business could wait. There were more important questions that required answers. The Duke of Northmere's visits to Berkeley Square became a pattern that Eleanor could neither understand nor ignore. 3 times in as many weeks, William appeared with business matters for Lord Whitmore, yet her employer was rarely at home when the Duke chose to call. "His Grace wishes to wait in the library," Bennet announced one afternoon, his tone carefully neutral, though his eyes held questions Eleanor could not answer. Eleanor was reviewing household accounts when William found her in the small parlor. She rose quickly, her heart betraying her with its rapid beating. "Your Grace, Lord Whitmore is not at home." "So I was informed." He stepped into the room, his presence filling the modest space. "I confess, the timing is not entirely accidental." Eleanor's hands tightened on the ledger she held. "You should not say such things." "Should I not?" His blue eyes held hers with uncomfortable intensity. "I find I am weary of pretense, Miss Pemberton. These past weeks I have manufactured excuses to call here, all for the possibility of speaking with you. Is honesty not preferable to deception?" Before Eleanor could respond, Lady Whitmore's sharp voice echoed from the hallway. "Bennet, where has that girl gotten to? I require her assistance immediately." The moment shattered. Eleanor curtsied quickly and moved toward the door, but William's hand brushed against hers as she passed, a brief contact that left her skin burning. "We shall speak again," he said quietly, and it sounded less like a question than a promise. Lady Whitmore awaited her in the morning room, her expression cold and calculating. "The Duke of Northmere has been calling here with remarkable frequency." One might wonder at such attention to my husband's company, given that Lord Whitmore is rarely at home when his grace chooses to visit. I could not say, my lady. Could you not? Lady Whitmore's smile was thin as a blade. I trust you understand, Eleanor, that servants who attract unwanted attention often find themselves without positions and without references. The threat was clear, delivered with the casual cruelty of absolute authority. Eleanor curtsied deeply. I understand perfectly, my lady. That evening, Eleanor composed her weekly letter to her mother with trembling hands. Dearest Mamma, I trust the medicine continues to provide some relief. I am enclosing what I can manage this month, though I fear it grows increasingly difficult to make ends meet. The cost of your treatment weighs heavily upon my mind. Please write and assure me you are following Dr. Carlyle's instructions. She stared at the meager coins beside the letter, knowing they were barely enough. The medicine her mother required grew more expensive with each month, and Eleanor's wages could stretch only so far. The following week brought a new complication. Lady Vivian Carlyle swept into London society with the dramatic flair of a woman accustomed to being the center of attention. Eleanor first encountered her at one of Lady Whitmore's afternoon gatherings, where she assisted with serving tea. Vivian was beautiful in a deliberate, calculated way, her emerald silk gown cut to draw every eye, diamonds glittering at her throat and wrists with a profusion that seemed almost vulgar in its excess. How delightful to be back in London, Vivian purred to Lady Whitmore. The country grows so tiresome. Tell me, is the Duke of Northmere still maintaining his obstinate refusal to marry? Such a waste of excellent prospects. Lady Whitmore's gaze flickered briefly to Eleanor. His Grace has been much occupied with business matters of late. Has he indeed? Vivian's eyes sharpened with predatory interest. How fortuitous. The Duke and I are distantly related, you know. I really must call upon him. Eleanor, standing near the sideboard, found herself troubled by Vivian's ostentatious display of wealth. The jewelry alone represented a fortune, and for a woman supposedly still in mourning, the bright colors and extravagant adornments seemed inappropriate. Later, young Meg sought Eleanor out in the servants' hall. Miss Pemberton, that Lady Carlyle, the girl whispered urgently. Cook says her husband died not 6 months past, yet she's already wearing colors and jewels. And my cousin who worked in the Carlyle household says the late Mr. Carlyle was involved in questionable business dealings. Made his fortune through means that weren't quite proper, if you take my meaning. Eleanor frowned. That is a serious accusation, Meg. You should not repeat such things without evidence. No, miss, you're right. Only it makes a body wonder where all that money came from. The conversation lingered in Eleanor's mind as she went about her duties. There was something unsettling about Vivian Carlyle beyond the merely unpleasant. Something calculated and cold beneath the practiced charm. 2 days later, William arrived during one of Lord Whitmore's rare afternoons at home. But when their business concluded early, Eleanor found herself alone with him in the library once more. You seem troubled, William observed, setting aside the book he had been pretending to read. I am well, Your Grace. Are you? He moved closer. I have noticed you seem withdrawn of late. Has someone distressed you? His genuine concern threatened her composure. Your visits here have not gone unnoticed. Lady Whitmore has made it clear that she finds the situation irregular. William's jaw tightened. Lady Whitmore presumes too much. She presumes nothing. She has absolute authority over me, and she has made abundantly clear that servants who attract unwanted attention find themselves unemployed. Then let me help you, William said urgently. Your mother requires medicine you cannot afford. Allow me to provide it. Eleanor stepped back as though struck. And what would you have in return for such generosity? I may be reduced in circumstances, Your Grace, but I am not for sale. You misunderstand me entirely, William said, looking genuinely distressed. I offer assistance freely, without expectation, and I wish only to maintain my dignity, Eleanor replied, her voice breaking despite her best efforts. Every kindness you offer only serves to highlight how impossible any future between us must be. Silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken longing and impossible barriers. Finally, William spoke, his voice low and rough. If you truly wish me to cease these visits, I shall honor that request. But know that it will cost me dearly. It costs us both, Eleanor whispered. But some prices must be paid to preserve what dignity remains. She left the library before he could respond, before the tears threatening to fall could betray how close she stood to surrendering to the impossible dream he offered. That night, Eleanor wrote another letter to her mother. this one more honest than any she had permitted herself before. "Mamma, I fear I have made an error in judgment. I have allowed myself to become attached where I should have maintained only professional courtesy. I do not know how to unmake this mistake. Please write soon. Your wisdom would bring me comfort." 3 days passed without word from William. Eleanor told herself it was for the best. That distance would allow them both to return to the proper order of things. But she found herself listening for his voice in the hallway, watching for his tall figure through the windows, and hating herself for the weakness. On the 4th day, Bennet approached her with his usual formality. "Miss Pemberton, His Grace the Duke of Northmere has requested to speak with you. He awaits in the garden." Eleanor's first instinct was to refuse. Meeting alone with William in the garden, without even the pretense of chance encounter, was scandalous. But something in Bennet's expression, a curious mixture of sympathy and concern, made her reconsider. "Very well. Please inform Mrs. Davies I shall return shortly." The garden was a modest space where roses struggled against London's soot. William stood near the fountain, his shoulders tense, and when he turned at her approach, the expression on his face stole her breath. "Eleanor," he said, and the sound of her name without title or formality sent heat rushing through her. "I know this places you in an untenable position, but I can no longer remain silent. These past weeks, I have made excuses to visit this house all for the chance of moments in your company. It is more than pleasant conversation. It is so much more." "You must not say such things," Eleanor protested, though her heart betrayed her with its wild beating. "Why? Because society deems it improper? What weight do such artificial distinctions hold against genuine connection?" "All the weight in the world," Eleanor replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You speak of connection as though it exists separate from the realities we live within. But every word you speak to me brings me closer to ruin. Then let me help you." "No." Eleanor's voice was firm despite the tears threatening to fall. "Can you not see? Every kindness you offer only highlights how far I have fallen and how impossible any future between us must be. I have a mother depending on me, a position I cannot risk losing, and a heart I dare not permit to hope for things forever beyond my reach." They stood facing each other across the garden path, the space between them vast as oceans, despite the few feet that separated them. Eleanor could see the struggle in William's expression, desire battling understanding, frustration warring with compassion. "If you truly wish me to leave," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, "I shall honor that request. But know that this thing between us will not be so easily dismissed. Then we must try harder," Eleanor whispered, "for both our sakes." She turned and fled back to the house, her composure crumbling with each step. Behind her, she heard no pursuit, only the silence of impossible longings and unbridgeable distances. That evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she allowed herself one moment of weakness. She stood at her small window, looking out over darkened London streets, and wondered if somewhere in this vast city, William Huntington was thinking of her too, trapped in the same impossible situation, separated by barriers no amount of desire could overcome. Tomorrow, she would be strong. Tomorrow, she would remember her place and guard her heart with renewed vigilance. But tonight, just for tonight, she permitted herself to imagine what might have been, if the world were different, and love could bridge the chasm between a duke and a servant who had once been a viscount's daughter. The whispers began among the household staff first, spreading through the kitchens and servants' quarters, with the insidious persistence of damp through old walls. The Duke of Northmere's frequent visits had not escaped notice, and servants possessed both keen observation skills and long memories. "They say His Grace lingers in the library whenever Miss Pemberton is there," one housemaid murmured to another over the breakfast preparations. "And he never stays long when she's not about." Eleanor heard none of these whispers directly, but she felt their effects in the subtle shifts of behavior around her. Meg grew protective, positioning herself nearby whenever Eleanor worked in common areas. Mrs. Davies, the housekeeper, watched her with troubled eyes. Even Bennet's usual deference acquired an edge of sympathy that Eleanor found more disturbing than outright hostility would have been. The inevitable confrontation came on a gray morning in early spring. Lord Whitmore summoned Eleanor to his study, his expression thunderous. "Sit down, Miss Pemberton," he commanded, gesturing to the chair before his desk. His tone brooked no argument. Eleanor sat, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "I have become aware," Lord Whitmore began, his voice tight with barely controlled anger, "of certain irregularities in your conduct. The Duke of Northmere's visits to this household have become a subject of considerable speculation among the staff. My lord, I assure you, do not interrupt me." He leaned forward, his face reddening. "I do not know what game you are playing, Miss Pemberton, but I will not have it under my roof. A woman in your position seeking to entrap a duke through deliberate encounters and calculated displays of learning is beneath contempt." The accusation struck like a physical blow. "I have sought nothing from his grace. The encounters you reference were never of my design. Were they not?" Lord Whitmore's laugh was harsh. "You expect me to believe that a duke calls here repeatedly by pure coincidence? That he requests your presence by chance? I may be many things, Miss Pemberton, but I am not a fool." Eleanor's throat tightened. "What would you have me do, my lord? I have maintained proper conduct at all times. I have performed my duties without complaint. If his grace chooses to call here, that is beyond my control." "Then you will make it within your control," Lord Whitmore snapped. "You will ensure that you are never alone in his presence. You will discourage any attempts at private conversation. And be warned, Miss Pemberton, if this situation escalates into public scandal, you will be dismissed immediately and without references. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, my lord." "See that you remember it. You may go." Eleanor fled to her room, her composure crumbling the moment the door closed behind her. She sat at her small desk, her hands trembling as she drew out writing paper. "Dearest Mamma," she wrote, her pen scratching across the page, "I hope this letter finds you in better health. The weather has been damp, which I know troubles your lungs. Please assure me you are following Dr. Carlyle's instructions carefully. I enclose what I can manage this month, though circumstances have become somewhat complicated. Please do not worry yourself. I am managing as I always have." She stared at the inadequate words, then added more honestly, "The truth is that my position here grows increasingly precarious. I may need to consider other arrangements. If circumstances require it, might I come to Derbyshire for a brief visit? I miss you terribly." The response arrived 10 days later. Judith's handwriting, shakier than Eleanor remembered. "My dearest Eleanor, please do not sacrifice more for my sake. You have already given up so much of your life to care for me. If your position is difficult, you must think of yourself first. I cannot bear the thought of you suffering on my account. Whatever small comfort I have is enough. Use your resources to secure your own future. Your devoted mother, Judith." Eleanor pressed the letter to her chest, tears she had been holding back finally spilling over. Even in illness, her mother thought only of protecting her daughter. The crisis came at Lady Harrington's spring ball, where Eleanor attended as Lady Whitmore's companion and assistant. The ballroom glittered with candles and jewels, the cream of London society gathered for one of the season's premier events. Eleanor stood near the refreshment table, ensuring Lady Whitmore's champagne glass remained filled and her shawl readily available. She had perfected the art of being present yet invisible, a necessary skill for someone in her position. Then Vivian Carlyle swept into view, resplendent in crimson silk that pushed the boundaries of propriety, diamonds blazing at her throat. Her eyes found Eleanor immediately, and a calculating smile curved her perfect lips. Even the most generous reading of morning etiquette allowed no such glitter before a year had passed. Vivian's crimson seemed a declaration, not an oversight. "How delightful," Vivian purred, approaching with deliberate grace. Lady Whitmore's little companion. Eleanor, was it? "Miss Pemberton," Eleanor corrected quietly, keeping her gaze lowered. "Of course. Tell me, Miss Pemberton, are you enjoying the ball? Though I suppose servants can hardly appreciate such occasions properly." Before Eleanor could respond, Vivian's hand moved in an arc that seemed natural, but was clearly calculated. Her champagne glass tilted, and suddenly Eleanor's modest gray gown was drenched in sparkling wine, the cold liquid seeping through the fabric. "Oh, how clumsy of me," Vivian exclaimed, her voice carrying across the nearby guests. "I am terribly sorry, though perhaps gray was not the best choice for such an important event. Wine stains show so dreadfully on cheap fabric." Laughter rippled through the surrounding crowd. Eleanor stood frozen, humiliation burning through her as sharply as the champagne's chill. She opened her mouth to make some appropriate response, to maintain the dignity that was all she had left. "Lady Carlyle." The voice was cold as winter frost, and Eleanor looked up to see William striding toward them. his expression thunderous. "I believe an apology is in order." "Your Grace." Vivian's surprise appeared genuine. "I have already apologized." "It was merely an accident." "Was it?" William's eyes were hard as steel. "It appeared remarkably deliberate from where I stood." The surrounding conversations died away. Eleanor felt the weight of dozens of eyes upon them, felt the moment crystallizing into exactly the sort of public scandal Lord Whitmore had warned against. "William, please," she whispered urgently, "do not make this worse." "Worse?" He turned to her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "They humiliate you deliberately, and you ask me to remain silent?" "Your attention makes it worse," Eleanor said, desperation lending her courage. "Can you not see? Every word you speak in my defense only confirms what they already suspect." Vivian watched this exchange with growing satisfaction. How touching. The Duke defending his little pet. "Tell me, Your Grace, does the entire household know of your peculiar interest in their servant?" William's jaw tightened dangerously, but Eleanor stepped forward before he could respond. "If you will excuse me, I must change my gown. Lady Whitmore will be requiring my assistance." She fled the ballroom, William's voice calling her name behind her. But she did not stop. In the retiring room, she scrubbed at the wine stains with shaking hands, tears of anger and humiliation blurring her vision. Meg found her there 20 minutes later. "Miss Pemberton, His Grace is asking for you. Says he needs to speak with you urgently. Tell him I am indisposed. He's waiting in the garden. Says he won't leave until you come." Eleanor closed her eyes. Of course he would not leave. William Huntington was nothing if not stubborn. "Very well. Give me a moment." She found him pacing among the roses, his hands clasped behind his back, his shoulders rigid with tension. He turned at her approach, and the anguish in his eyes nearly undid her. "Eleanor, I am so sorry. I should not have drawn attention." "No, you should not have," she interrupted, her voice sharper than she intended. "Do you not understand what you have done? By defending me so publicly, you have confirmed every suspicion, given substance to every rumor. I could not stand by while you were humiliated." "Your defense humiliates me more than any spilled champagne ever could." Eleanor's composure finally shattered. "You speak of protection, of assistance, but all you do is destroy what little I have left. My reputation, my position, my hope of maintaining any dignity in this household. All of it crumbles beneath the weight of your attentions." William reached for her, but she stepped back. "Eleanor, let me help you. Leave this place. I will find you a position somewhere safe, somewhere you need not endure such treatment. And live on your charity? Become your kept woman in all but name?" Eleanor shook her head. "I would rather scrub floors for a living than accept assistance that would make me beholden to you. That is not what I am offering. Is it not?" She met his eyes directly, letting him see her pain and anger. "You offer help, but help comes with obligations. Help creates debts that must be repaid, and we both know what repayment society would expect from a woman in my position accepting support from a man in yours." Silence fell between them, heavy and suffocating. William's face had gone pale, as though she had struck him. "You truly believe I would demand such repayment?" His voice was barely audible. "I believe that intentions matter less than appearances," Eleanor replied more gently. "And I believe that accepting your help would destroy what little remains of my self-respect." She turned to go, but his next words stopped her. "What will you do?" In the weeks after her transfer, Eleanor arranged what little removal could be managed. With Lord Whitmore's permission and the steward's wagon, Judith Pemberton was brought from Derbyshire to a sunlit cottage at the edge of the Yorkshire estate. The road was hard on her mother, but the quiet air and Eleanor's nearness repaid the journey. Eleanor did not look back. "I am requesting a transfer to Lord Whitmore's estate in Yorkshire. Perhaps distance will allow these rumors to die. And at least there I can economize better and visit my mother in Derbyshire when possible." "Yorkshire?" William's voice held something that might have been despair. "That is your solution? To run away?" "That is my survival," Eleanor corrected. "Goodbye, Your Grace." This time when she walked away, he did not call after her. Eleanor returned to the ballroom long enough to inform Lady Whitmore of her request for transfer, then retreated to the carriage for the journey back to Berkeley Square. That night, she penned a formal letter to Lord Whitmore, requesting transfer to his Yorkshire property. She wrote another to her mother, explaining that she would soon be closer and could visit more regularly. What she did not write was how her heart had broken with each step away from William, how the memory of his stricken expression would haunt her dreams, or how the impossibility of their situation had never felt more absolute. Some distances, Eleanor understood now, were measured not in miles, but in the unbridgeable chasms of class and circumstance, and some loves, no matter how genuine, could never overcome the harsh realities of the world they inhabited. 3 months had passed since Eleanor fled London for the relative safety of Yorkshire. The countryside stretched endlessly before her, green fields rolling beneath vast skies that seemed to promise both freedom and exile in equal measure. Lord Whitmore's Yorkshire estate was a sprawling affair, less grand than the London townhouse, but no less demanding. Eleanor supervised the household with quiet efficiency, managing servants who were more plain-spoken than their city counterparts, directing the daily operations that kept the manor functioning smoothly. It was honest work, exhausting work, and Eleanor threw herself into it with desperate determination. The small cottage on the edge of the estate grounds had become home to her mother. Judith Pemberton, 52 years old and growing frailer by the week, sat by the window most days, wrapped in shawls despite the approaching warmth of late spring. Eleanor visited each morning before beginning her duties, bringing medicine purchased with carefully hoarded coins and whatever small comforts she could manage. "You look tired, my dear," Judith observed one morning as Eleanor prepared her breakfast. "Are you sleeping?" "Well enough, Mama." Eleanor kept her voice steady, though the truth was that sleep came rarely and poorly. "The country air suits me better than London smoke, and yet something troubles you still." Judith's eyes, faded but still sharp, studied her daughter's face. "You cannot hide from a mother's sight, Eleanor." Eleanor sat down beside her, taking the fragile hand in her own. "I am only concerned about your health. The medicine is expensive, and I fear—" "You fear that your wages will not stretch far enough." Judith finished the thought with characteristic directness. "My darling girl, you have sacrificed too much already. If circumstances require difficult choices—" "No," Eleanor interrupted firmly. "We will manage. We always have." But the lie sat bitter on her tongue. The truth was that managing grew harder each week. The cost of Judith's medication had increased yet again, and Eleanor's modest salary could barely cover their most basic needs. She had already sold the last pieces of jewelry that had escaped her father's creditors, pawned the watch that had been her grandfather's, and mended her own gowns until the fabric could bear no more patches. The crisis she had been dreading arrived in the form of a letter from Lord Whitmore's steward. Eleanor opened it in her small room late one evening, the single candle casting wavering shadows across the page. "Miss Pemberton," the letter began with characteristic formality. "Due to financial pressures on the estate, Lord Whitmore has determined that the Yorkshire property must be sold. All current staff will be released from service within 6 weeks. You will receive compensation for the notice period, but unfortunately, no references can be provided given the irregularities surrounding your departure from London." Eleanor read the words 3 times before their full meaning penetrated. No position, no income, no references that would allow her to secure another post, and a mother who required constant care and expensive medication. She sat very still for a long time, the letter clutched in her trembling hands, feeling the walls closing in around her. 6 weeks. That spanned 6 weeks to find some solution, some path forward that would not end with her mother suffering for lack of medicine, or herself forced into situations too desperate to contemplate. The following afternoon, Meg found Eleanor in the still room, sorting through herbs with mechanical precision. The girl's usually cheerful face was troubled. "Miss Pemberton," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they were alone. "I've heard something you should know. That Lady Carlisle, Lady Vivian, she was here in Yorkshire weeks ago." Eleanor's hands stilled. "Here?" "In the village, asking questions. About you specifically." Meg twisted her apron nervously. "My cousin works at the inn where she stayed. Lady Carlisle was inquiring about your situation, your mother's illness, making it known to all who would listen that you were dismissed from London service for improper conduct with a duke." Eleanor closed her eyes. Of course. Vivian Carlisle would not be content with merely winning William's attention. She needed to ensure that Eleanor could never threaten her ambitions again. "There's more," Meg continued reluctantly. "I found some papers in the drawing room after she left, letters that must have fallen from her reticule. I kept them thinking they might be important, though I couldn't read all the words. But they seemed wrong somehow. Before dawn, She copied every page under the steward's seal, returned the originals to Meg's keeping, and sent the certified copies to Mr. Dalton by express. Do you still have them? Meg nodded and produced several folded sheets from her pocket. Eleanor unfolded them carefully, her eyes scanning the contents. What she found made her blood run cold. The letters were correspondence between Vivian and various merchants, discussing payments and property transfers. But what caught Eleanor's attention was a name that appeared repeatedly. Pemberton. Her father's name. And beside it, references to recovered assets and redistributed funds. Eleanor's mind raced. Could these letters be evidence of Vivian's involvement in the schemes that had ruined her father? Were these the proof that might finally bring justice? Meg, she said urgently, these letters must be kept safe. Tell no one you have them. Do you understand? Yes, miss. But what do they mean? I am not entirely certain yet. But I believe they may be the key to understanding what truly happened to my family's fortune. Meanwhile, in London, William Huntington sat in his study surrounded by documents that told a story of greed and betrayal. For weeks now, Mr. Dalton had been conducting quiet investigations into old business dealings, following threads that connected back to the financial collapse of Viscount Pemberton years earlier. What they had discovered was damning. The fraudulent investment scheme that had destroyed Eleanor's father had been orchestrated by a consortium of men, one of whom was the late Mr. Carlyle, Vivian's husband. Through a complex web of shell companies and false partnerships, they had systematically stripped assets from their victims, concealing the stolen wealth through careful manipulation of accounts and records. Your Grace, Dalton said, laying another sheaf of papers on the desk. I have traced some of the Pemberton assets. A portion of the fortune was never truly lost. It was simply hidden. If we can prove the connection to Carlyle, there may be legal grounds for recovery. William studied the documents, his expression grim. How much might be recovered? Difficult to say with certainty, but potentially enough to ensure that Miss Pemberton's mother receives proper medical care and that Miss Pemberton herself has some degree of financial security. Then we must pursue this. William stood, his decision made. I shall travel to Yorkshire immediately. Eleanor needs to know what we have discovered. Your Grace, might I suggest caution? Lady Carlyle has considerable influence in society, and if she learns of these investigations before we have secured all the evidence... I understand the risks, Dalton, but Eleanor is facing her own crisis, and she deserves to know that there is hope. Prepare the carriage. We leave tomorrow at first light. That night, William composed a letter to Eleanor, though he knew he would likely arrive before it did. Still, he needed to put his thoughts into words, to articulate the promise he was determined to keep. My dear Eleanor, he wrote, these months of separation have been among the most difficult of my life, but they have not been idle. I have discovered truths about your father's ruin that change everything. There is evidence, solid, documented evidence, that much of what was stolen can be recovered. More than that, there is proof of who orchestrated the fraud and how they concealed their crimes. I am coming to you with this information, and with a proposal that I pray you will not dismiss out of hand. Some distances can be bridged, Eleanor, if both parties are willing to take the first step. I remain, now and always, yours, William. He sealed the letter and entrusted it to his fastest messenger, then began preparations for his own journey north. In Yorkshire, Eleanor stood at the cottage window as twilight descended, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Her mother slept fitfully behind her, each breath a reminder of how fragile their situation had become. 6 weeks. She had 6 weeks to find a solution to problems that seemed insurmountable. No position, no references, no resources beyond what she could scrape together from the sale of a few remaining possessions. But she also had Meg's letters, mysterious and potentially significant. She had her own determination, forged in years of surviving the impossible. And somewhere, though she tried not to think of it, there was William, a man who had promised to help, whose words in the garden still echoed in her memory. For both our sakes, she had told him that day. Distance was supposed to make things clearer, to restore proper perspective and sensible boundaries. Instead, Eleanor found herself thinking of him constantly, wondering if he thought of her, if the connection between them had been as real as it had felt, or merely a temporary delusion born of loneliness and proximity. Tomorrow she would begin the practical work of planning for an uncertain future. Tomorrow she would be strong and pragmatic and realistic about her options. But tonight, just for tonight, she allowed herself to hope that William's promise had been more than empty words. That somewhere in the evidence and investigation and careful planning, there might be a path forward that did not end in desperation. The stars emerged one by one over the Yorkshire countryside, constant and unchanging, while Eleanor Pemberton stood vigil over her sleeping mother and contemplated the mysteries of fate, fortune, and the stubborn persistence of hope even in the darkest hours. Dawn had barely broken over the Yorkshire hills when Eleanor made her way through the estate gardens toward the small greenhouse where she cultivated herbs for her mother's remedies. The morning mist clung to the ground like gossamer, and the air carried the sharp scent of wet earth and growing things. She was kneeling among the chamomile plants, her hands stained with soil, when a shadow fell across her work. Eleanor looked up, startled, and found herself staring into the familiar blue eyes of William Huntington. For a moment, neither spoke. William looked travel-worn, his coat dusty from the road, his dark hair slightly disheveled as though he had ridden hard through the night, but his gaze held the same intensity Eleanor remembered, the same searching quality that had unsettled her from their very first meeting. "William," she breathed, rising quickly to her feet and brushing the dirt from her hands. "What are you doing here?" "I came to find you." His voice was rough with exhaustion and something else, urgency perhaps, or determination. "I have much to tell you, Eleanor. Things that cannot wait any longer." Eleanor glanced back toward the main house, aware of how improper this meeting would appear if discovered. "You should not be here. If Lord Whitmore learns, Lord Whitmore's opinions concern me far less than your welfare." William stepped closer, and Eleanor could see the dark circles beneath his eyes, the lines of strain around his mouth. "Please, Eleanor, grant me a few moments of your time. What I have discovered changes everything." Something in his expression convinced her. Eleanor nodded toward a path that led deeper into the gardens, away from the house and prying eyes. "Walk with me, but quickly. The servants will be stirring soon." They walked in silence for a few moments, the gravel crunching softly beneath their feet. William seemed to be gathering his thoughts, choosing his words with care. "I have spent these past months investigating your father's ruin," he began finally. "The financial collapse that destroyed him was not the result of poor judgment or bad luck, Eleanor. It was deliberate fraud, orchestrated by a consortium of men who systematically stripped assets from their victims through false investment schemes." Eleanor's breath caught. "I have long suspected as much, but without proof." "I have proof." William pulled a leather portfolio from inside his coat. "Documents, correspondence, financial records. Mr. Dalton has been painstaking in his research. One of the principal architects of the fraud was a man named Harold Carlyle." The name struck Eleanor like a physical blow. Vivian's late husband. The very same. William's expression darkened. "The scheme was elaborate, involving shell companies and manipulated accounts. Your father was not the only victim, but he was among those who lost the most. What we have discovered is that much of the stolen wealth was never truly lost, merely hidden, transferred through various channels to protect the conspirators." Eleanor stopped walking, her mind racing. "Are you saying that my father's fortune could be recovered?" "Not all of it, but a substantial portion. Enough to ensure your mother receives the medical care she requires. Enough to provide you with some degree of independence." William's voice softened. "I have already begun legal proceedings to recover what can be proven. The courts move slowly, but the evidence is compelling." Tears stung Eleanor's eyes, a mixture of grief for what had been lost and desperate hope for what might still be salvaged. "Why would you do this for us? The expense, the time. Do you truly not know?" William moved closer still, close enough that Eleanor could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, feel the warmth radiating from him despite the morning chill. "These months apart have been torment, Eleanor. I have tried to convince myself that distance would cure me of this impossible attachment, that I could return to my life as it was before I met you, but I cannot. I will not. William, please, let me speak." His voice held a note of desperation that silenced her protests. "I am in love with you, Eleanor Pemberton, not with some idealized vision of what you might have been had circumstances been different, but with who you are now. Your strength, your intelligence, your fierce determination to maintain dignity in the face of impossible odds. I admire you more than any woman I have ever known." Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs. "You speak of love as though it exists separate from the world we inhabit. Even if I believed that your feelings were genuine, Even if I allowed myself to return them, what future could we possibly have? You are a duke. I am a dismissed servant without references or prospects. Then allow me to change your prospects. William took her hand in his, and Eleanor felt the now familiar shock of contact between them. I do not ask for your hand today. I know you would refuse me, and rightly so, but I ask permission to court you properly, openly, to give you time to trust that my intentions are honorable, that I seek partnership, not possession. Eleanor wanted to pull away, to protect herself from the hope his words kindled, but she found she could not move, transfixed by the sincerity in his expression. Even if your intentions are pure, society would never accept such a match. Your position, your responsibilities. My responsibilities include using my position for good. William interrupted. And if society finds our connection unacceptable, then society is in error. I am prepared to face whatever consequences come from choosing my own path. But I am not certain I can face them, Eleanor admitted, her voice breaking. The cost of such a choice falls more heavily on women than on men. You speak of consequences, but you cannot truly understand what it means to risk everything on the uncertain promise of acceptance that may never come. William's grip on her hand tightened. Then let me bear some of that risk. Accept my help with your mother's care. Not as charity, but as a loan if you prefer. Take time to see that my commitment to you is not some passing fancy born of novelty or pity. Allow me to prove through actions, not merely words, that I am worthy of your trust. Eleanor looked up at him, seeing in his face the same struggle she felt within herself, the war between desire and prudence, between hope and fear. She had spent years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from the pain of wanting things forever beyond her reach. But William was offering her something she had never dared imagine, the possibility that perhaps some barriers could be crossed, some distances bridged. My mother needs me, she said finally. The medicine, the care, these cannot wait on my decision. I understand. That is why I have brought this. William withdrew a small purse from his coat, enough to cover 6 months of proper medical treatment. Consider it advance payment for services you will render me in the future, if that makes it more acceptable. He laid a folded agreement beside the purse, terms in Dalton's hand, witnessed by the inn's solicitor, engaging her for estate audits and correspondence at a fair salary. The coin merely bridged the weeks before the first remittance. Services? Eleanor's voice held a note of suspicion. I have estates that could benefit from your administrative talents, William said quickly. Your work here has proven your capability. If you will not accept help freely given, then accept employment on terms that preserve your pride. It was a transparent fiction, but one that offered Eleanor a way to accept what she desperately needed without entirely compromising her principles. She hesitated, torn between gratitude and the knowledge that accepting this gift would bind her to William in ways she was not certain she was ready to acknowledge. Why? She asked finally. Why does this matter so much to you? You could have any woman in England, titled, wealthy, beautiful, with impeccable connections. Why pursue someone who brings you nothing but complications? William smiled, and the expression transformed his serious features into something almost boyish. Because when I am with you, I feel more myself than I have in years. Because you challenge me, question me, refuse to defer to my title or my wealth. Because every decision I make, I find myself wondering what you would think of it, how you would approach the problem. He paused, his expression growing more vulnerable. Because I have never met anyone who made me want to be better than I am. The words struck something deep within Eleanor, a longing she had buried so thoroughly she had almost forgotten it existed. To be seen, truly seen, not as a function or a problem to be solved, but as a complete person worthy of admiration and affection. It was a gift beyond price. I do not know how to do this, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. I have spent so long protecting myself from hope that I no longer know how to allow it in. Then we shall learn together. William lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. I ask only for the chance, Eleanor. Time to prove that what I feel is real and lasting. Time for you to decide whether you can trust me with your heart. From the direction of the house, Eleanor heard the distant sound of doors opening, servants beginning their morning routines. The spell was breaking, reality intruding on this stolen moment. I must go, she said reluctantly. If we are discovered, I know. William released her hand, but his eyes held hers. "But I will not disappear again, Eleanor. I have taken rooms in the village. I will remain here until we have resolved these matters, both the practical ones and the personal. That will cause talk. Let it. I am done with pretense and propriety that serves only to keep people in their designated places." William's expression grew fierce. "You deserve better than the life circumstances have forced upon you, and I intend to help you claim it, whether society approves or not." Eleanor hurried back toward the house, her mind in turmoil, the purse of coins heavy in her pocket. She had accepted his help, had allowed him to state his intentions openly. In doing so, she had taken the first step down a path whose destination she could not clearly see. But as she glanced back and saw William still standing in the garden, watching her retreat with an expression of such open longing that it made her heart ache, Eleanor felt something shift within her. Perhaps some risks were worth taking. Perhaps some possibilities deserved exploration, even when wisdom counseled caution. That evening, as Eleanor sat beside her mother's bed administering the medicine that William's gift had made possible, Judith reached out and grasped her daughter's hand. "Something has changed," the older woman observed. "I see it in your face." Eleanor hesitated, then decided her mother deserved the truth. "The Duke of Northmere has come to Yorkshire. He has discovered evidence about Father's ruin, and he has offered assistance. And," Judith's eyes were knowing, "and he has declared his feelings for me. Asked permission to court me properly. Do you return his feelings?" Eleanor closed her eyes. "I am afraid to. The distance between us is so vast, and the potential for pain so great." "My darling girl," Judith said gently, "you have spent years sacrificing your own happiness to care for me. Do not let fear prevent you from accepting joy when it finally presents itself. This Duke, does he seem sincere? Terrifyingly so. Then perhaps you should give him the chance he asks for. Give yourself that chance." Judith squeezed her daughter's hand. "You deserve happiness, Eleanor. You have earned it 1,000 times over." As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, she stood at her small window looking out over the darkened countryside. Somewhere in the village below, William Huntington was likely sitting in some rented room, planning his next steps, determined to overcome every obstacle between them. And for the first time in years, Eleanor allowed herself to imagine a future that included more than mere survival. A future where love might actually be possible, where the distance between a duke and a dismissed servant might be bridged by courage, determination, and the stubborn refusal to accept that some things were simply impossible. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications. But tonight, Eleanor Pemberton permitted herself to hope. The news of William's presence in Yorkshire spread through the countryside with the speed of wildfire through dry grass. Lady Vivian Carlyle received word within 3 days, and her reaction was immediate and calculated. She arrived at the Whitmore estate in a grand carriage accompanied by a small but influential party from London society: Mrs. Henrietta Ashford, Lord and Lady Pembroke, and the sharp-eyed Mrs. Dalrymple, a woman whose opinions carried considerable weight among the ton. The group claimed to be touring the northern estates, but their timing was too convenient to be coincidental. Eleanor first learned of their arrival when Meg burst into the still room, her face flushed with alarm. "Miss Pemberton, Lady Carlyle is here with a party of London guests. She's demanding to see Lord Whitmore, but he's away in Manchester. The steward doesn't know what to do with them." Eleanor's stomach tightened. "Where is the Duke?" "Still at the village inn, I believe. Should someone fetch him?" "No." Eleanor made the decision quickly. "Let them settle first. I will not give Lady Carlyle the satisfaction of seeing me panic." But panic was precisely what she felt as she made her way toward the main house. Vivian's arrival could mean only one thing. She had come to destroy whatever fragile hope William's presence had kindled. The confrontation came sooner than Eleanor anticipated. She was crossing the main hall when Vivian's voice rang out from the drawing room, sharp and carrying. "I find it most irregular that the Duke of Northmere should absent himself from London for such an extended period, particularly to rustic surroundings that offer so little in the way of proper society." Eleanor paused, her hand on the newel post of the servants' stairs. "His Grace's movements are his own concern," came Mr. Dalton's measured reply. William's secretary had arrived earlier that morning with additional documents. "Are they?" Vivian's laugh was like breaking glass. "When those movements involve clandestine meetings with dismissed servants, I should think they become everyone's concern. The Duke's reputation is not yours to manage, Lady Carlyle." William's voice cut through the room, and Eleanor heard the steel beneath his controlled tone. She moved closer, positioning herself where she could observe without being immediately visible. William stood near the fireplace, his posture rigid with barely contained anger. Vivian faced him from the center of the room, her beautiful face arranged in an expression of concerned sympathy that fooled no one. "My dear William," Vivian purred, "I come only out of friendship and concern for your welfare. This situation with Miss Pemberton has become the subject of considerable speculation in London. As your family connection, I felt obligated to intervene before irreparable damage is done to your standing." "How considerate." William's tone was arctic. "And you brought witnesses to this intervention, I notice." Mrs. Ashford shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "We merely accompanied Lady Carlisle on what we understood to be a tour of the countryside. How convenient that the tour led directly here." William moved toward Vivian with deliberate slowness. "Tell me, Lady Carlisle, what is your true purpose in coming?" Vivian's mask of concern slipped fractionally. "I have already stated. You have stated lies." William produced a folder from the table beside him. "I have here documented evidence of fraud perpetrated by your late husband and his associates. Evidence that includes your own correspondence discussing the redistribution of stolen assets." The room went utterly silent. Vivian's face paled, then flushed with anger. "How dare you make such accusations?" she hissed. "I knew nothing of Harold's business affairs." "Did you not?" William opened the folder, extracting several pages. "Then perhaps you can explain these letters, bearing your signature, discussing payments from accounts that can be directly traced to the Pemberton estate fraud." "Those are forgeries," Vivian declared, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Are they? I have witnesses who can authenticate your hand. I have bank records that corroborate the transactions. And I have victims, good people whose lives were destroyed by the greed of men like your husband." William's voice rose slightly, passion breaking through his controlled facade. "You profited from that destruction, Lady Carlisle. You wear jewels purchased with stolen money. You live in comfort built on others' suffering." Vivian's eyes darted around the room, seeing the doubt growing in the faces of her companions. She made her decision in an instant, launching her counterattack with vicious precision. "And what of your own behavior, Your Grace? These noble accusations from a man who has been conducting an illicit affair with a servant." She turned to address the assembled witnesses directly. "Ask him about his frequent visits to this household in London, his private meetings with Miss Pemberton, his obvious obsession with a woman so far beneath his station that the very association is scandalous." Mrs. Dalrymple gasped. Lord Pembroke looked deeply uncomfortable. Mrs. Ashford's expression sharpened with interest. "The Duke of Northmere," Vivian continued, her voice rising, "has been making a fool of himself over a dismissed servant, a woman without prospects or breeding, who has clearly calculated her every move to ensnare him through feigned learning and practiced helplessness. That is enough." Eleanor stepped into the room, her voice cutting through Vivian's tirade. Every head turned toward her. She moved with deliberate grace, her worn gray gown a stark contrast to Vivian's expensive silk, but her bearing was that of a woman who had nothing left to lose, and therefore nothing to fear. "Lady Carlisle," Eleanor said quietly, "you speak of calculation and practice as though they were vices. I confess, I have indeed calculated. How to stretch wages that barely cover necessities, how to afford medicine for a dying mother, how to maintain dignity when society offers only contempt. As for practice, I have practiced survival, practiced resilience, practiced the art of remaining human in circumstances designed to strip away humanity." She reached into her pocket and withdrew the letters Meg had found. "But if we speak of calculation, let us examine yours. These are letters you dropped during your recent visit to Yorkshire. Letters discussing the Pemberton assets and their redistribution. Letters that prove your knowledge of and participation in the fraud that destroyed my family." Vivian's face contorted with rage. "You dare! A mere servant! I dare because truth is not dependent on social station." Eleanor's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. "You came here to destroy the Duke's reputation and ensure I could never threaten your ambitions. But you have miscalculated, Lady Carlisle. His Grace's character needs no defense from me, but the truth deserves to be spoken regardless." She turned to face the assembled guests directly. "Yes, the Duke and I have spoken privately. Yes, there has been impropriety by society's narrow standards. But there has been no dishonor, no manipulation, no calculated seduction. Only two people who found in each other something rare, genuine understanding and respect across barriers that society insists must not be crossed. William moved to Eleanor's side, not touching her, but standing close enough to make his allegiance clear. Miss Pemberton speaks with eloquence and accuracy. I will not apologize for my interest in a woman whose intelligence and character far exceed those of most women I have met in so-called proper society. If that interest has caused scandal, then I accept responsibility for it. But I will not stand by while she is maligned by someone whose own conduct is far more worthy of censure. The silence that followed was heavy with tension. Mrs. Dalrymple studied Eleanor with new eyes, as though seeing her clearly for the first time. Lord Pembroke cleared his throat awkwardly. Even Mrs. Ashford looked uncertain. Finally, Mrs. Dalrymple spoke. Lady Carlisle, I believe this tour has become rather more complicated than anticipated. Perhaps it would be best if we departed. Yes, Lady Pembroke added quickly. We should not have intruded on what is clearly a private matter. Vivian looked around desperately, seeing her support crumbling. You cannot simply— We can and shall, Mrs. Dalrymple said firmly. Come, ladies, Lord Pembroke, if you would arrange the carriages. As the London party filed out, studiously avoiding further eye contact, Vivian paused at the doorway. Her beautiful face was twisted with hatred as she looked back at Eleanor and William. You have won nothing, she spat. Society will never accept this union. You will be laughingstocks, pariahs. The scandal will follow you both for years. Perhaps, William replied calmly. But we will face it together, with clear consciences. Can you say the same, Lady Carlisle? Vivian left without another word, her defeat evident in the rigid set of her shoulders. When the sound of departing carriages finally faded, Eleanor found herself trembling with reaction. William gently guided her to a chair. That was extraordinarily brave, he said quietly. That was terrifying, Eleanor corrected, her voice shaking. William, you heard what she said. The scandal will not simply disappear because we spoke truth. No, he agreed. But we have witnesses now who saw her true character, who heard your defense and recognized its merit. That is more than we had this morning. Mr. Dalton entered with a tea tray, his timing impeccable as always. If I may say so, Miss Pemberton, your composure under such circumstances was admirable. And your grace, the evidence presented, was most effective. As Eleanor sipped her tea with hands that gradually steadied, she felt the weight of what had just occurred settling upon her. The confrontation with Vivienne had forced everything into the open. William's feelings, her own response, the impossibility and possibility of their situation existing simultaneously. What happens now? She asked finally. William met her eyes. Now we decide how we wish to proceed. Together, if you are willing. And Eleanor, looking at the man who had defended her so fiercely, who had risked his reputation on evidence and truth, rather than convenience and social acceptance, found herself nodding. Together, she agreed softly. Though heaven knows where this path leads. Wherever it leads, William replied, it will be honest. And that, I think, is enough to begin with. The morning after Vivian's departure dawned clear and bright. But the weight of what had transpired hung heavy over the Yorkshire estate. Eleanor sat in her mother's cottage, watching Judith sleep peacefully for the first time in weeks, the medicine William had provided already showing its effects. A soft knock at the door announced William's arrival. He entered quietly, his expression serious, but not unkind. How is she? He asked, nodding toward Judith's sleeping form. Better. The medicine is working. Eleanor's voice was thick with gratitude and something else. Uncertainty. William, we must talk. I know. He took the seat across from her, his hands folded between his knees. Eleanor, I have something to ask you, and I need you to hear me fully before you answer. Eleanor's heart began to race, knowing what was coming. Will you marry me? The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrifying in equal measure. Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the pull of desire warring with the weight of reality. William, I know what you will say, he interrupted gently. You will tell me of the impossibilities, the social consequences, the damage to my position and work. You will remind me of all the reasons this cannot be. But I am asking you to consider not what society says is impossible, but what your heart tells you is true. Eleanor opened her eyes to find him watching her with such naked hope that it made her chest ache. My heart is not the only consideration. There are practical realities we cannot ignore. Then let us discuss them honestly. William leaned forward. Yes, there will be scandal. Yes, we will lose some social connections. But Eleanor, I have spent these months evaluating what truly matters. My estates do not require the approval of London society to function. My tenants care more for fair treatment than for my choice of wife. The work I wish to do, the reforms I hope to implement, these things require character and determination, not social acceptance. But your political allies may withdraw their support, yes. William's voice was steady. And I will find new allies who value substance over superficial propriety. I'm not suggesting this path will be easy, Eleanor. I am suggesting it is possible. Before Eleanor could respond, another knock sounded at the door. Meg entered, looking flustered. Begging your pardon, Miss Pemberton, but Lord Whitmore has returned unexpectedly. He's asking for you, and for his grace as well. Eleanor and William exchanged glances, then rose together. Whatever Lord Whitmore wanted, it would determine much about their immediate future. They found Lord Whitmore in his study, standing by the window with his back to them. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. Your Grace, Miss Pemberton, please, sit. They sat, and Eleanor felt William's hand brush against hers. A brief, reassuring contact. I have received reports from London. Lord Whitmore began without preamble. About recent events involving Lady Carlisle and her rather precipitous departure from my estate. I have also received letters from Mrs. Dalrymple and Lady Pembroke, both of whom felt compelled to share their observations. Eleanor's stomach tightened, but she kept her expression composed. Lord Whitmore studied them both for a long moment. Miss Pemberton, I owe you an apology. When I confronted you in London about the Duke's visits, I assumed the worst. I allowed society's prejudices to color my judgment, and I threatened you unjustly. I was unjust. You shall have a character from me, full and without reservation, whenever you require it. Eleanor's breath caught. My lord, let me finish. Lord Whitmore raised a hand. I have known your family since you were a child, Eleanor. Your father was a good man who fell victim to unconscionable fraud. I should have done more to help after his death, but I allowed concern for my own reputation to dictate my actions. That was cowardice on my part. He turned to William. Your Grace, I have watched you these past days. I have seen how you conduct yourself, how you speak of Miss Pemberton, how you present evidence rather than relying on rank to make your arguments. You remind me of what true nobility ought to be. William inclined his head. Thank you, my lord, though I have merely acted as any honorable man should, which is precisely why such behavior is remarkable. Lord Whitmore replied dryly. Most men of your station would have abandoned this situation long before now, or worse, pursued it dishonorably. He paused. I understand you have proposed marriage to Miss Pemberton. I have, William confirmed, though she has not yet answered. Lord Whitmore looked at Eleanor. The decision is yours, of course, but I wish to offer something that might make that decision easier. Eleanor, if you will accept it, I would like to formally recognize you as ward of the Whitmore family. It would not restore your father's title, but it would provide you with a measure of social standing, enough, perhaps, to make a marriage to his grace less scandalous. Eleanor stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. My lord, why would you do this? Because it is right. Because I failed your father, and I will not fail his daughter. Lord Whitmore's expression softened slightly. And because, having witnessed your courage and dignity under impossible circumstances, I have come to respect you greatly. You are a credit to your family name, Eleanor, and it is time someone acknowledged that publicly. Tears stung Eleanor's eyes. The offer was more than she had dared hope for. Not a complete restoration of her former status, but a bridge between her current position and William's world. I would be deeply honored, my lord, she managed. Good. The papers can be drawn up within the week. Lord Whitmore looked between them. Now, I believe you two have matters to discuss. Miss Pemberton, take the rest of the day. Your duties here are suspended until you have made your decision. They left the study in a daze, neither speaking until they had reached the garden where William had first found Eleanor that morning so many weeks ago. Eleanor, William began, but she stopped him with a raised hand. Let me speak first, please. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. When you first came to London, when we first spoke in that library, I thought you were merely amusing yourself with pleasant conversation. I could not fathom that a duke might genuinely see value in someone like me. Eleanor, let me finish, she said gently. These months have taught me that I was wrong. Not about the difficulties we will face, but about your sincerity. You have proven yourself through actions, not words. You have fought for justice for my family, defended my character publicly, and offered me choices rather than ultimatums. She met his eyes directly. I have spent years believing that hope was a luxury I could not afford, that love was something that happened to other people, in other circumstances. But you have made me believe that perhaps some barriers exist only because we accept them as insurmountable. William's expression grew intent, hope kindling in his blue eyes. I am still afraid, Eleanor admitted. Afraid of the scandal, the judgment, the possibility that despite our best intentions, this will end badly. But I am more afraid of spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been if I had been brave enough to try. Does that mean— Yes, Eleanor interrupted, her voice strengthening. Yes, William, I will marry you. Not because Lord Whitmore has offered me social standing, though I am grateful for it. Not because you have the resources to help my mother, though that matters deeply. I will marry you because when I imagine my future, I cannot imagine it without you, because you have shown me that love need not be a weakness, but can be a source of strength. For a moment, William simply stared at her as though unable to believe what he had heard. Then he moved, closing the distance between them and gathering her into his arms with a fervor that stole her breath. Eleanor, he murmured against her hair, I swear to you, I will spend every day proving that your trust is not misplaced. We will face whatever comes together. Eleanor pulled back just enough to look up at him. It will not be easy. No, he agreed. But anything worthwhile rarely is. They stood there in the garden, holding each other, aware that they had just committed to a path that would challenge everything they knew about society's expectations and their own resilience. But for the first time in years, Eleanor felt not fear, but hope. Fragile, perhaps, but genuine. That evening they gathered in Judith's cottage to share the news. Eleanor's mother wept with joy, grasping William's hands and thanking him through her tears. You will be good for each other, Judith said firmly. Eleanor has needed someone who sees her true worth. And you, Your Grace. I suspect you have needed someone who will challenge you to be better than circumstances demand. I believe you're right, Mrs. Pemberton, William replied, his arm around Eleanor's shoulders. Later, as Eleanor walked William back toward the main house, he stopped suddenly. I have something for you. I meant to wait for a more formal moment, but— He pulled a small box from his pocket. Inside was a ring. Not ostentatiously large, but beautifully crafted. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds. It was my grandmother's, William explained as he slipped it onto Eleanor's finger. She was, by all accounts, a woman ahead of her time, opinionated, educated, and utterly devoted to my grandfather, despite society's initial disapproval of their match. I like to think she would have approved of you. Eleanor looked down at the ring glinting in the fading light. I will do my best to prove worthy of it. You already are. William lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just above the ring. Tomorrow, we will begin the practical arrangements. We should marry soon. I see no reason to wait, do you? No reason at all, Eleanor agreed, though we should prepare ourselves for the reactions. Let them react, William said firmly. We know the truth of what we are building together. That is enough. As they parted for the night, Eleanor touched the ring on her finger, feeling its unfamiliar weight. She had made her choice, had accepted the risk of hope over the safety of resignation. Whatever came next, whatever storms they would face them together. And that, Eleanor thought as she climbed the stairs to her small room, was worth any amount of scandal or social disapproval. Love, real and tested and freely chosen, was worth fighting for. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications. But tonight, Eleanor Pemberton, soon to be the Duchess of Northmere, allowed herself to simply be happy. 6 months had passed since Eleanor Pemberton became the Duchess of Northmere, and the world had not ended, though there had been moments when it seemed it might. The wedding had taken place in the small chapel on the Northmere estate, witnessed by a handful of people who truly mattered. Judith, now much improved in health, Lord Whitmore and his wife, Mr. Dalton, Meg, and a few trusted servants. The ceremony was simple, but beautiful. Eleanor wearing a gown of ivory silk that William had commissioned, her mother's pearls at her throat, and William's grandmother's ring on her finger. London society had reacted precisely as predicted. The announcement in the papers had generated weeks of scandalized commentary. Eleanor was described variously as an opportunist, a scheming servant, and a social climber of the worst sort. William was labeled eccentric at best, mad at worst, a duke who had thrown away his position for an inexplicable infatuation. Doors that had once been open to William closed with decisive firmness. Invitations ceased. Several political allies withdrew their support for his proposed reforms. Lady Vivian Carlyle, it was said, had retreated to the continent, though whether from genuine disgrace or strategic regrouping remained unclear. But something unexpected had happened as well. The tenants and workers on William's estates had greeted Eleanor with cautious curiosity that quickly transformed into genuine approval. Here was a duchess who understood the value of a shilling, who knew what it meant to work with one's hands, who listened to their concerns without condescension because she had lived in circumstances not so different from their own. Eleanor had thrown herself into the work of managing the estates, with an energy born of years of suppressed potential finally finding purpose. She established schools in 3 villages, employing teachers who would educate both boys and girls. She created apprenticeship programs for promising young people, giving them opportunities that might otherwise have been forever beyond their reach. She implemented reforms in the workers' cottages, ensuring decent housing and fair treatment. The changes were practical, grounded in Eleanor's own experience of hardship and her determination that others should not suffer needlessly when solutions were available. Word spread beyond Northmere's borders, and other progressive landowners began to take notice, requesting consultations, asking advice. Even some members of the aristocracy, those who valued results over rigid propriety, began to reconsider their initial judgment. Mrs. Dalrymple, who had witnessed the confrontation with Vivian, had become an unexpected ally, speaking favorably of Eleanor's character in influential circles. Lord Whitmore's public support had provided crucial social legitimacy. The journey had not been without pain. Eleanor still felt the sting of cutting remarks overheard at the occasional social functions they attended. William had indeed lost political support that might have advanced reforms more quickly. Some family connections had been strained, perhaps permanently. But they had gained something more valuable, a partnership built on genuine respect, shared purpose, and the knowledge that they had chosen each other freely, without coercion of circumstance or pressure of expectation. Judith Pemberton lived in a comfortable cottage on the estate grounds, her health much improved with proper medical care, and the peace of knowing her daughter was not merely surviving, but thriving. She spent her afternoons in the garden William had designed specially for her, growing herbs and flowers, receiving visits from Eleanor nearly every day. Meg had been promoted to Eleanor's personal assistant, a position that recognized both her loyalty and her considerable organizational talents. The young woman had blossomed in her new role, managing Eleanor's correspondence and helping coordinate the various charitable initiatives. Mr. Dalton remained William's trusted secretary, but had become something more, a genuine friend to both Duke and Duchess, his dry wit and unflappable competence providing steady support through the turbulent early months. On an evening in late autumn, as the sun cast long golden shadows across the Northmere gardens, Eleanor and William walked together along the gravel paths. The air held the sharp sweetness of dying leaves and wood smoke from distant chimneys. "Lord Ashton has written," William mentioned, his hand warm in Eleanor's. "He wishes to discuss implementing similar education programs on his estates. That makes 7 landowners who have inquired in the past month." Eleanor smiled. "Change spreads more slowly than we might wish, but it does spread. Each small victory builds toward larger transformations. You sound very philosophical this evening. I was thinking earlier about where we were a year ago. The fear, the uncertainty, the impossibility of imagining this moment." Eleanor paused, looking up at the house that was now her home. Not through birth or fortune, but through choice and courage. "Sometimes I still cannot quite believe it is real." William stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Do you have regrets? About the doors that closed? The connections that were lost?" Eleanor considered the question seriously, as she always did when William asked for her true thoughts. "I regret that change requires such high costs. I regret that society's prejudices hurt good people unnecessarily. But do I regret choosing you? Choosing this life? Never. Even when Lady Morrison cut you at the assembly last month? Even then, Eleanor's smile turned wry. Lady Morrison's approval has never been necessary for my happiness. Your respect, your partnership, that matters. The work we are doing together matters. The rest is merely noise. William lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles just above the ring that had become so familiar. I love you, Eleanor Huntington, Duchess of Northmere. More each day, if that is possible. It is possible, Eleanor replied softly, because I find the same is true for me. They resumed walking, comfortable in the silence that had become one of the gifts of their marriage, the ability to simply be together without constant need for words. Inside the house, preparations were underway for a small dinner party. Lord Whitmore and his wife would be joining them, along with Lord Ashton and his daughter and Mr. Dalton. Not a grand society affair, but an evening of genuine conversation with people who valued substance over superficiality. I received a letter from my mother today, Eleanor mentioned. She asks if we might visit Derbyshire next month. There is a school there that could benefit from your advice on funding. Of course. We shall make it a proper visit, not rushed. William's expression grew thoughtful. Your mother seems much happier of late. She is at peace, Eleanor agreed, knowing that I am not merely surviving, but building something meaningful. That matters more to her than any social acceptance ever could. As they approached the house, William paused once more. Do you remember what you said to me that day in Yorkshire? That some distances existed only because we accepted them as insurmountable? I remember. You were right. Not that crossing those distances was easy. We both know it has been anything but it was possible. You made me believe that, Eleanor. And in believing it, we made it real. Eleanor leaned against him, feeling the solid strength of his presence, the reality of what they had built together. We made each other believe. That is the gift. Not that you rescued me from my circumstances, but that we chose to face the world together, each making the other stronger. The dinner that evening was filled with laughter and serious discussion in equal measure. Lord Ashton spoke passionately about education reform. His daughter, a woman of Eleanor's age who had never married and felt no lack because of it, engaged Eleanor in spirited debate about women's property rights. Lord Whitmore told stories of Eleanor's father that made her laugh and cry simultaneously. When their guests had departed and the house had grown quiet, Eleanor found William in his study, reviewing papers by lamplight. She moved to stand behind him, her hands resting on his shoulders. A good evening, she observed. The best kind. Good company, meaningful conversation, and the promise of change to come. William set down his pen and drew Eleanor around to sit on his lap. Propriety be damned. Do you know what I thought about most during those months we were apart? Tell me. This. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, but quiet evenings where we could simply be ourselves, partners in all things, building a life that mattered to us, rather than conforming to expectations that never fit properly. Eleanor rested her head against his shoulder. We have that now. We do. And I am grateful for it every single day. Later, as they prepared for bed, Eleanor caught sight of herself in the mirror, no longer the pale, exhausted woman who had fled London in disgrace, but someone transformed by love, purpose, and the freedom to become fully herself. She thought of all the Eleanors she had been, the privileged Viscount's daughter, the desperate young woman watching her father's ruin, the servant maintaining dignity through impossible circumstances, and now the Duchess who was redefining what that title could mean. Each version had been necessary, each had taught her something essential, and each had led her to this moment, this life, this love that had seemed so impossible, but had proven to be the most real thing she had ever known. William came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked at their reflection together. What are you thinking? He asked. That some loves are worth fighting for. That some distances can be crossed if both parties are willing to take the first step. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to move forward despite it. Wise words, Your Grace. Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. We did it, William. Against all odds, despite every obstacle, we built something real and lasting. We did, he agreed, and we will continue to build, day by day, choice by choice, for the rest of our lives. As Eleanor drifted toward sleep that night, safe in William's arms, she thought about all the women who might hear their story someday, women who felt trapped by circumstances, who believed hope was a luxury they could not afford, who had been told that some barriers were simply too high to cross. She hoped they would hear this truth, that love, real and freely chosen, has the power to transform not just individual lives, but the very structure of society. That courage and determination, combined with genuine partnership, can overcome obstacles that seem insurmountable, that it is never too late to choose hope over resignation, possibility over limitation. The road had not been easy. The costs had been real. But the reward, a life lived authentically, a love that strengthened rather than diminished, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared purpose, had been worth every sacrifice, every scandal, every closed door. Some loves, Eleanor understood now, are not meant to fit within society's narrow definitions. They are meant to expand those definitions, to show that human connection transcends artificial barriers of class and circumstance. They are meant to prove that the heart, when given the courage to choose freely, will always choose truth over convenience, love over safety, possibility over limitation. And so Eleanor Huntington, Duchess of Northmere, once Eleanor Pemberton, servant and forgotten daughter, closed her eyes in peace, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to build on what they had created together. The world was changing, slowly but surely. And she and William were part of that change, proof that some distances could indeed be bridged, that some loves were worth fighting for, and that happiness, real and hard-won, was possible even in the most unexpected circumstances. May you sleep peacefully tonight, knowing that genuine love, when built on respect and nurtured with courage, is a foundation strong enough to weather any storm. May you never lose hope that circumstances can change, that barriers can be overcome, and that choosing love over fear is always, always worth the risk.